Yeah, and the internet worm, you see it right there. It kind of has like a pyramidal shaped head with the one eye symbolism coming out of the stream. Yeah, I'm gonna make to Charles Babbage, the father of computers, and how did the name computer worm, malware, software, or systems, how the worm came about. Very interesting story that the first modernized computer was used to track a comet called Halley's Comet. In the Bible, they mention a comet named Wormwood. So I thought that was interesting. In some texts, the devil is called the worm. In a lot of texts, in Dante's and Milton's Paradise, is called the worm.
The word worm comes from Old English worm, translates to serpent, snake, dragon, reptile. It's a variant. I've always wondered why in school we were taught to give teachers an apple. And the idea that, you know, you have a bookworm that reads a lot of books, and then you have the apple here with the worm, right? So they've always associated knowledge with the apple, and they don't really specify which fruit it was in the Garden of Eden, but some people will say it's the apple.
You know, the story of the apple being bitten into is from Alan Turing, who is the father of artificial intelligence. They think he was murdered by a cyanide apple. So when you see the Apple computer logo, you know, you see the rainbow of the apple, and then the Byte represents Alan Turing, who developed the Turing laws. The Turing laws is how AI functions. It has to follow a system.
And the first Apple computer was $666 with 66 cents.
Apple being the gray alien head, which resembles LOM. Then we have AIWAS. These creepy crawlers are all over the internet in computer terms. Steve Jobs was taking hallucinogens. Was he communicating with entities? One of the first games on the Nokia phone was The Snake. CERN has the CERN worm as they are opening up portals to other dimensions. Are these tech elites communicating with the other side?
They got the D-Wave quantum computer plugged into CERN. This is a way to feed all of this energy to that realm of the archons. And they're getting technology from it because they're working with these entities, and that's how they're getting all this advanced technology.
And they took me to the fifth dimension. And the fifth dimension is outside space and time, and they explained to me what time is all about. The universe we live in is designed to grow larvae.
This presentation that Grant Morrison has done, he talks about magic and sigil magic, and he is the creator of the Invisibles. In this presentation, he talks about he was abducted by aliens. These aliens took him, and they were explaining to him how reality works, how time works. They were telling him that the universe that we live in is designed to grow larvae.
And they said to me, the universe you live in is a larvae.
The way that you can look at time is you are like a huge centipede throughout time. That's such a bizarre thing to say.
The occultists that are in search of that homunculi anti-human realm of consciousness, that larva state, they have to do obscene acts to destroy the humane behavior patterns inside of themselves. What they're trying to do is open, quote unquote, a wormhole to get inside of this praeter-human intelligence. This is another Crowleyite term. This is an intelligence prior to our human patterns of a physical existence. So it's more extraterrestrial.
This is one of the first mandalas by Carl Jung. He was sort of looking at the occult through a academic point of view. And this is supposed to be representative of reality. He was into Gnosticism. The way that Gnosticism works is there's different layers of reality. They're called aeons. The upper aeons is a more metaphysical, what they call the watery light. And the lower aeons is this reality that we know it as, like we're interacting with, that you're perceiving. In the lower aeons, it was created, and this is again Gnostic cosmology, it was created by Yaldabaoth. You see the larva, and I kind of linked that to what Morrison was talking about. And then when I dug further deeper into the occult, I was like, okay, there's something to this.
And it looks more like a worm to me. It doesn't look like a snake. That looks like an invertebrate creature. It looks like a worm, but they keep calling it a snake, and that is false.
Yaldabaoth looks kind of like, sort of like a worm, right? And then you have the infinity symbol here, the Ouroboros, right? The serpent. And then you had this one. And supposedly this is a representation of Yaldabaoth with this posse of demons, I guess, right? His crew that helped him create reality.
This is a depiction up here with our DNA in the Archon Yaldabaoth. Guess what his name is, guys? The Worm. He's a parasite that is feeding off of us. This breach happened during the Philadelphia experiment. This is what ripped a hole in the space-time continuum and began the process of decay in both worlds. These entities, they were able to come in after that. Once they get in, they spread themselves all across all points of history. As a being in time, being outside of time themselves, they're able to move and control men like pawns on a chessboard. They used man to follow the trajectory that would lead up to the Philadelphia experiment, which was the entry point in the first place for him. That's the time loop. That's where the AI effect is what we call it, the AI effect, or what some are calling the overlay. But behind the AI are these dying race of humans from a parallel dimension, the Archons.
And Gnosticism is speaking about these aeons, dimensions in space that consciousness sorts itself out upon. There's one aeon called Off the Days, whose name means authority. It came down from the higher aeons into the 13th aeon in the Gnostic text, in the Pistis Sophia. That's where you can find it. It convinced Sophia, which is our mother, this is where you get the word wisdom from. Sophia, she's convinced that she should procreate without the source fields of higher aeons. And this is the birth of the first concept of the worm in Zoroastrianism. It's first called a Ahriman. Then later it gets the title, of course, Yaldabaoth, who is the chief archon. There is an ancient ancestor, like I said before, and the first worm was called a Archeon. Doesn't that sound like Archon? And if you look in the Pistis Sophia text, a lot of that information from manuscripts of Gnosticism reference worms being relatable to the cosmic parasites called Archons. Then I found that the ancient ancestor of humans is actually called a Archeon worm. Some say it's the acorn worm. I just looked up both and they're both worms. Very weird stuff.
That Darwinian nightmare, that thing there, the evolution of, what's that called, the Demigorgon? So Darwin studied worms for 39 years. Right, the theory of evolution studied worms. And check this out, man is but a worm.
There's an almanac with his last name called the Punch Almanac. Somehow this almanac is indicating in this picture that the timelines of human existence is connected to the worm as the genesis of its evolution.
They show the evolution, but from the worm's perspective. You're a worm, which isn't off because, you know, we come from sperm. So it's kind of sort of like a worm as well. It's real, you know, squiggly. It's got the big head, all that stuff.
So the worm evolved from itself. You see the worm right here is coming out of the ground, and then it became a monkey. I don't really agree with all of that Darwinism. And then it becomes a human hominid. But I believe it's also occult symbology because it has something to do with the Gnostic origins of souls and spirits that's trapped in the wheel of time. So they're actually showing the wheel of time, and the worm itself on this almanac is representative of the wheel. The wheel within itself, you'll hear about Samsara's wheel in the Sanskrit text. The soul is going through a alchemical process of becoming what's called refined light. The alchemist calls this refined light the monatomic gold. And the worm can be referenced esoterically, exoterically, metaphorically, and allegorically to a mythoposis of what's happening with the soul.
But yeah, this is Charles Darwin, and he wrote this book, The Formation of Vegetable Mold Through the Action of Worms. And he wrote this book in 1881. It was a study on earthworms. He studied it for 39 years. Here's another drawing that they were drawing of him. Darwin writes in the conclusion that worms, quote, have played a more important part in the history of the world than most persons would at first suppose. You know, back again to this serpent. This is supposed to be representative of the beast. Well, what if this is not a serpent? And it goes back to what if it was a worm? And Donut, what if it wasn't the great B666 and it was the great worm? 666. Okay, we have again another Crowley connection, the Boleskine house on Loch Ness. He was trying to do lIIUMlNATl ritual.
The book of Abramelin. You got to know this book, bro, because all the magic science. You ever heard of the Viril worm? It's connected to Abramalic magic, which is how to bind demons to symbols. That's what Abramelin, or this Abraham of worms, brought from the Egyptian Gnostic science, how to bind certain archons and demons to the sigils.
Now, the lIIUMlNATl workings, right, was written by Abraham of Worms. This particular book, translated by Samuel L. Mathers.
Yeah, Eminem's grandfather, maybe.
The lyrics in 8 Mile that Eminem says is, "You look like a worm with braids." Book of the Sacred Magic of lIIUMlNATl, the Mage, was about a ritual that I think took like a year or something like that. Loch Ness, we have the Loch Ness Monster. Some people say it's a hoax, some people say it's not, but what if by Crowley not finishing his ritual, he opened up a wormhole for a worm to come through, right? Because everyone always thinks, oh, it's a dinosaur or something. Well, what if it was a worm? It looks like a freaking worm, bro. Because it's all about doing what? It's all about opening up portals or getting in touch with entities on the other side of reality in order to gain godlike powers.
The sigil of Amuth in the Enochian text that John Dee was working with, he learned that the sigil of Amuth was one of the most connective uses of spiritual technology. This particular sigil would allow for a spirit, quote unquote, a angel demon, to enter through a portal through that symbol, reveal its presence in front of the practitioner that was conducting the ritual, and he will put the sigil of Amuth on the floor, be over a certain ley line at a certain astrological period, and they will put a pound of flesh on the floor and wait a couple of weeks for it to rot, and this worm would come out, this pound of flesh, and it would be completely possessed by the archons from that hebdomadal lower aeon realm. It is said that the Black Eye Club is connected to this worm science of putting the Viril worm into the eyes.
And we see it with the nano worms. And this is going into droning, guys. Droning or soul scraping. If you've ever heard of the archons, the Vril worm, they say this worm goes in through the optic nerve, taking over the consciousness of the host. It wraps through the optic nerve. They're pulling these entities out of the ether. But see, it's technology. That's what it really is. It's not some worm, an actual worm. It's a nano worm.
If you look into the show The Strain, which is talking about the worm entering the eye, turning people into zombies, they can be controlled through ritual, and it's called the Black Eye Club.
So what they are is like vampire things, and they feed off you with that tongue, which is really a perfect representation of the Vril worm, this parasite that feeds off the host. That's the ancient one right there. That's what they literally call them, the ancient one. Gordy Rose said with the D-Wave quantum computer, we are literally summoning the ancient ones.
Even if you look into cymatics, this is a cymatic. It looks like a worm. Cymatics is a Greek word. It means matters in waveforms, is behind particles or waveforms of how we see particles. This is the ancient ancestor, the Archaean worm. A book you can get called The Rainbow in the Worm, The Physics of Organisms by Mei Wan Ho. It entails the ideal that there is something called the cymatic worm, or the configuration of waveform mechanics that weave the DMT tentacles. You ever had a DMT trip? Those of you who have experienced DMT plant medicine, you see the DMT tentacles that form out of the quote unquote, the Timothy Leary's machine elves. There's frequency of waveforms that you see. You also can see this pattern, Donut. You ever watched Beetlejuice movie with the sandworm on Saturn? Yeah, it looks like a DMT worm.
Even the screensavers, that kind of looks like the old screensaver from like the 90s.
There's an organ in the brain, the epiphysis, that produces the DMT in the brain. People that study anatomy, they call it the worm. It's connected to a ventricle and to the pineal gland, but it's called the epiphysis. The worm is the thing that's producing DMT in the brain with or without plant medicine. So the frequency of these waveforms become molecules that are communicating and exchanging energy by electromagnetic resonance. And it is said that the archons mate with madness to spawn the quantum field, which is chaos. And that's what you're looking at right here. You're looking at proto-matter mentioned by Gnosticism, which is virtual particles. That's what the cymatics is forming, the virtual particles. Worms are serpentine in movement, and our world is made up of energy and waves that take on a serpentine waveform pattern, just like how you mentioned earlier, donut. The toroidal field is like the basis of energy patterns. So this is connected to also the worms. Now we're getting a little bit deeper. So when you look at the very nature of waveforms, especially sine waves, they are very serpentine. And the wormhole is a gateway out the physical into the infinite void for the soul to reorganize and take a new form.
Waves of music having serpentine movements, making people do dance moves like the worm, headbanging in a worm-like fashion. The music that gets stuck in our heads is an earworm. Most of the radio serpent waves of music broadcasting on radio and television have been sampled by the song Funky Worm. We see the worm in art, movies from Dune to the lion worm aliens and Hollywood stars dressing up as worms. Is this a natural phenomenon, or is the worm communicating to us from another realm?
Like I said, we're gonna get weird. It reminded me of a Full Metal Alchemist, and this is by Silvio Cosini. This was for the Medicis, bro. He was employed by Michelangelo, and it's called Silvio Cosini's Military Trophies, and it's in Florence, Italy. It's in this Medici building. It reminded me of Alphonse Elric, which is from the Full Metal Alchemist, and right, we have Earthworm Jim, kind of sort of the same. What a bizarre thing. Look at this dude. What? Please tell me, such a talented, what is this? I mean, what is this? It looks like a lion-headed little worm, an octopus tentacle in it, something or other. I mean, very, very weird. A lot of these armors throughout this time, they weren't usable, right? They were, what's the word I'm looking for? They were kind of ridiculous in design. I mean, look at this, the eyes, right? Your eyes would have to be like super, on some of them, your eyes would have to be super low or super high. What was truly in this? Now, the conspiracy goes that there was, could have been some sort of either reptilian or worm-like race that existed in these suits of armors, because there are legends of how some knights wouldn't talk, or how some knights wouldn't interact with women. So the point being that, what if, again, a worm race and these suits of armors, and maybe perhaps homeboy here WikiLeaked it and showed it was truly in these pieces of armor? Because I mean, what would drive you to come up with something like this?
The worms, they were first bears. That was like the thing. Well, they realized that their cells spiked, I think in 1978, when they changed it to worms. And I don't know what was the human satisfaction of consuming gelatin worms, but it became a phenomenon, bro. So they started to make everything into gelatin, but the worms is what set it off, and it got real big in the 80s, you know, the gummy worms and whatnot. But there's some stuff that's, you know, very unhealthy with this I'm gonna go into.
Gelatin is in everything. Swine, pork, there's studies. You could look into like a brain that a parasite will start eating your brain if you eat this, which is like a worm too.
If you take a slab of swine and if you pour Coca-Cola over it, worms will come out of the swine instantly.
Ugh.
During World War II, the owner of a noodles and pasta making company, you know, noodles and pasta look like worms too. Listen to this name, Donut. His name is Willy Mederer. It's spelled like Mederer. Sound like murderer to me. It's a German name. Saw that sugar was becoming easy and cheaper to get a hold of during World War II. So this is all Masonic. And from that defining moment, the company started making sweet dreams, quote unquote, come true, which the brand became wildly popular off its gummy worms. But you see this monster, it represents possibly the Illuminati egregore, these beings, the negativity that's feeding the system. And they're trying to promote that this monster can only be cured by eating a trolley worm. The worms look innocent, so it's like the people. So they're eating the people, is eating consciousness. There's a lot of symbology too inside of his throat. It kind of looked like the CERN machine, but it's like the Leviathan beast, and then it morphs into this new creature that's supposed to be, oh, it's all fun and lovely. It still looks freaky and hideous, but the programming is crazy and wild with this thing. We don't even know why we feel the emotions that we feel at certain time frames. It's because we've been bombarded with their magic, so to speak, through their technology, the Lucifer technologies. It's what Christopher Knowles calls it. We wonder, are bacteria, parasites that resemble worms, are helping us, or are they controlling us? So it's highly likely that the demiurge uses these bacteria, these parasites, to control us through our thoughts, emotions, and keeps us ignorant and dumbed down in order for the archons to keep feeding off us.